Good afternoon. Welcome to the Institute for Energy Law's webinar covering the field, a discussion with energy lawyers in different disciplines. I'm Vicki Adams, the Deputy Director of the Institute. I want to thank IEL's Young Energy Professionals Committee for working to put this program together. In addition, I would like to thank IEL's online learning sponsor, BakerBots. This program will last approximately 60 minutes, and as this is a series geared toward law students, we have not requested MCLE credit. At the end of the presentation, we'll leave time for questions and we will allow you to turn on your cameras and join the conversation. Your moderator for today's panel is Shanisha Smith. Shanisha is an associate at Baker Hostetler in Houston, where she has an energy and environmental practice focusing on complex environmental and general commercial litigation matters. She also counsels on a variety of environmental programs and compliance issues. She has an LLM in Energy, Environmental, and Natural Resources Law from the University of Houston Law Center. Prior to joining Baker Hostetler's energy team, she clerked for the Honorable Judge George C. Hanks Jr. of the United States District Court for the Southern District of Texas. She also counsels in a pro bono capacity for a program that provides legal work for minority or women-owned businesses, and she is very involved in IEL's Young Energy Professionals Committee. At this time, I'll turn it over to Shanisha to present today's panelists and get us started. Shanisha?
Thank you so much, Vicki. Great introduction. Today, I have the pleasure to moderate this panel of esteemed non-traditional energy lawyers, Sun, Patrick, and William. Please introduce yourself and use one word to describe how your role is different from the traditional oil and gas litigator or deal lawyer. Sun?
Hi, good morning, or I guess good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Sun Tran. I'm currently senior counsel at Shell. I support Shell's trading and supply group, focusing mostly on power and gas. I support the supply and trading group and across North America, so that would include Canada, the US, and Mexico. Prior to this, I was managing counsel over at Direct Energy, where I was head counsel for their trading and supply group, focusing again on gas and power. I've been in the industry, the power industry, for about 21 years now, I guess. And before that, I worked for a short time for a technology startup and began my career with one of the large firms in Canada in their securities group. In terms of one word, I guess you're looking for one word. I guess speed is one word, because I do work in the trading and supply group. We do focus on trading power and gas. There are the traditional sort of long form type contract work that we do that takes sometimes months to put a contract together. But a lot of times these traders are trading on a daily basis or a monthly basis, and sometimes those deals have to come together very, very quickly. And so I think speed is part of the biggest difference between a traditional oil and gas practice and what I do for Shell.
So I'm Patrick O'Malley. I'm senior counsel at EQT Corporation. We're the largest natural gas producer in the US. I've been with EQT for about 4 years, and I handle all of our corporate and securities filings. So anything with the NYSE. I also handle our financial commercial trading book from a legal perspective, and also assist with any of our M&A type of deal work. I'm a deal lawyer at heart. Before coming to EQT, I worked in private practice at Reed Smith in Pittsburgh. And that's actually how I came over to EQT, was helping with an acquisition. And then I kind of just stayed on board. If I had to identify one word, I'd use the word facilitator. And it's not that when you're in private practice, you don't facilitate things, because you certainly do. But probably the biggest thing that stuck out to me when I transitioned from private practice to in-house counsel was, when you're in private practice, you're hired to handle one discrete thing. And, it's just solve problem A for us. And we still do that on the inside, but I also have to be constantly thinking about, okay, how does this discrete task affect, aspects in our trading group or aspects in our, accounting team or with our financial team. And to be honest, that's actually something I really like about being in-house, is being able to see how all the parts fit together, working hand in hand with our business teams, and just really making sure that you're not just giving good legal advice, but you're also giving good business advice, understanding how the different applications of what you're telling your team fit from a business perspective, not just the legal aspects of it. So that's kind of why I honed in on the word facilitator, but we could chat more about that as things go on. I'll pass it over to William.
Great. I'm William Hotze. I'm counsel at Jones Murray Beatty in Houston, Texas. We're a bankruptcy boutique. We represent debtors, committees, purchasers, and really any party in interest in a bankruptcy here in the Southern District of Texas, and also in Delaware and the Southern District of New York, which is where most bankruptcies happen. Before I was at Jones Murray Beatty, I practiced at Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, Pittman. I left about 6 months ago to come over to here. I guess if I had to say one word to kind of describe our practice, is variety. And we'll talk more about that kind of as we go along. But the general, the thing that makes bankruptcy so fascinating and interesting, I'm going to convince all of you of that over the next hour, is that it's always different. And every case has its own particular problems, and every client has its own particular issues. And you represent all the different types of parties in bankruptcy. Because necessarily it's a very small bankruptcy bar. So there's very few lawyers who do complex 11 work. So you find yourself representing a debtor one day, a creditor committee the next day, a purchaser or a seller, and you have to know how to handle each of those issues, whether you're taking a deposition or negotiating a credit agreement or devising bid procedures in order to elicit the best bids in a sale through a bankruptcy process. So it's always different. It's always interesting, and so always a lot of variety.
Great. And I'm Shanisha, and my one word would be innovator. I'm an energy and environmental litigator at Baker Hostetler in Houston. And this means I represent energy companies before state and federal courts and agencies on environmental issues and finding innovative ways to zealously represent my clients while complying with state and federal regulations. The next discussion question involves our skills. I believe my regulatory experience helped me bolster my skill set of analyzing complex environmental laws and applying those rules to my client's situation to get them to a yes. William, how do you use your unique skill set or a specific discipline, bankruptcy, to contribute to your client's needs?
So bankruptcy lawyers are necessarily pragmatists because companies don't go through bankruptcy when things are going really well, right? Something has gone awry in some form or fashion. And the best example that I could think of to tell people this, or I guess a metaphor, is that traditional litigation or corporate deals is kind of like if you're standing in front of your grandmother's house arguing with your cousin about who gets the china set and who gets the artwork. And bankruptcy is like that same thing, except now the house is on fire. And so you can stand out in the yard and you can argue about it as long as you want. And you may have a really principled reason for why you're right, and you really want to be right. But the longer you argue, the more you drag the process out, the more obstinate you are, the less likely you're going to get anything out of that house. And so when in bankruptcy, when you deal with oil and gas cases, particularly in oil and gas cases, right? Because you can't just shut down a well, you can't just put it on ice, you can't just shut down a pipeline. These things have to keep moving, they have to keep operating. And so the value add that we add to clients is that we give them, they come to us with complex problems. We're able to quickly identify what's important, what's not important, and to give them advice. And once they determine what they want to do, to be able to execute that kind of game plan quickly and effectively. And the thing about the bankruptcy bar generally is it's very small and it's all very reputationally based. I know all lawyers, survive on their reputation, but it's even more so in bankruptcy where there really are very few people who do it, and you deal with them all the time, and your clients really rely on you to give them good advice in a quick and effective manner. And so it's kind of to say the pragmatism, I think, and not overbuilding their hopes, not telling them they're going to get a big recovery, not telling them that everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows, but sometimes telling them, hey, 10 cents on the dollar is more than 0 cents on the dollar.
Great. And Sun and Patrick, from the in-house perspective, the same question. How do you use your unique skill set to contribute to your internal clients or business units?
I think for myself, building the skill set over the years of understanding the business needs and how to balance those with the mitigating the risk and protecting the company. Obviously, as lawyers, that's what we're trained to do is, review all the risks and try to minimize as much as possible. But after working in the business for a number of years, you begin to understand sort of how to better weigh and balance those risks so that you're not holding up the company's goals and expectations. My brother actually, funny enough, he obtained his MBA from Chicago and actually joined the business, not my business, but the business in general in terms of becoming a gas trader, but on the commercial side of it. And his complaint over the years was that his legal group was always called the Business Prevention Unit where he worked. And hopefully I try to avoid being the Business Prevention Unit at Shell here. So, while we always try to minimize our risks, you have to understand that there are certain risks that you sort of have to accept. And as long as you explain those risks to your commercial group, and as long as they're willing to accept some of those risks, I think you have to let them make those decisions sometimes. Trading in commodities is not a risk-free endeavor. There's always going to be risk. There's going to be price risk, price volatility. There's counterparty risk. There's credit risk you've got to mitigate for. And so working as a team with our commercial and credit and regulatory and compliance folks, we try to address those risks to the best we can. And going forward in the deals that we put together, hopefully, we've addressed those risks and accounted for them in our pricing, accounted for them in the counterparties we deal with. But I think you have to be okay, I think, with, at the end of the day, having some risks that you may not necessarily want to have in a perfect contract. But when you work in commodities, you quickly understand there is no such thing as a perfect contract. Unlike perhaps private practice where, you're getting paid to really find all the different nuances and address them and make sure that you're protected against them. That's not what we do in-house. I think one in-house general counsel put it best. She said, we're not here to build Cadillacs, we're here to build Hondas as far as contracting goes. As long as your contract gets you 95% of the way there, you have to at some point be comfortable with that and accept that little bit of risk that you're going to have in those contracts in order to get the business done. And I think that probably applies in most in-house counsel positions. And but that's sort of where the skill set you have to obtain is understanding the business and commercial risks against those legal risks.
Hey, a Honda is a good, reliable car. That was my first car.
Yeah, it is.
When I was 16. Patrick, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would actually piggyback a little bit on what Sun was saying, and especially from a deal lawyer's perspective, what I've come to realize is that most really good deal lawyers are better project managers than anything, even more so than being great lawyers. And like Sun was saying, it's not our job to tell the business teams what they can and can't do. It's our job to make them aware of the risks, and it's up to them to actually determine whether or not they want to take that risk. Now, certainly if something's illegal, then, you raise that to their attention and you say, look, we actually cannot do this, right? It jeopardizes our license to operate. But, especially being on the business side, the company is making money in large part because it's willing to take risks, especially in our industry, right? So I think identifying the risks and identifying them early and having a good process in place for, managing deals, and raising those through the proper channels to your business team early is really the most proactive and best thing you can do, being on the in-house side, rather than just always being the person that's saying, we can't do this because of this. We can't do this because of this. And it is really easy, especially I think most attorneys are by nature pretty risk adverse people. So I think it's always good, especially when you're on, the inside, to maybe try to temper your own mannerisms a little bit, just to understand, hey, it's not my job to ultimately determine whether we're going to take this risk or not. It's to let my business team know what the risks are, let them know what the potential consequences of those risks are, and probably more importantly, let them know these in far enough advance that they can actually analyze it and make a good decision.
Excellent point. I have a bonus question that I didn't forward you three. Okay, something that keeps me up at night, and I know y'all hate that question, but something that keeps me up at night is ESG. And for those who are on the call that may not know what the acronym stands for, it's environmental, social, and governance. That ESG is the elephant in the room of mostly everyone's practice. And with the pandemic and the new administration, ESG is a buzzword for many energy companies. How has that shaped your practice? And maybe this is more geared to Sun and Patrick. And Patrick, we can start with you, as EQT recently, as in last week, doubled down on its ESG initiatives by pledging $75 million investment in ESG initiatives and technologies over the next 5 years, with a target to achieve net zero by 2025.
Wow, 2025, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I guess I'll start by giving a little anecdote. So before I joined EQT, like I mentioned, I was in private practice. I was predominantly a private equity M&A attorney. I really didn't have any clients that were in the oil and gas sector other than EQT. And then I joined EQT and I basically had to learn everything about oil and gas companies. I actually knew very little about, the industry as a whole. And so I did all that. And then I finally got to a point where I was very comfortable with how our business operated in our general operations. And like you said, then ESG became this big thing. And EQT's been putting out, we previously called it a CSR, or corporate sustainability report. And we switched it over, the nomenclature, in 2019 to ESG report. But we've been putting out a CSR report for 12 or 13 years. So it's not something that was new to us, but in terms of its implications on our general business, we definitely noticed a huge uptick in general stakeholder interest. Realistically, probably right around the start of the pandemic. But the long and short of it, I'm trying to get at is, prior to joining ET, I had no oil and gas experience, had to learn all that, and then suddenly had to learn basically everything about ESG, which is kind of like its own beast in and of itself. So if I could say one thing about, if you want to go in-house, I would say, you really have to be adaptable. You can't come in and say, this is what I do and I only do this, because if that's your approach, your in-house opportunities are going to be very limited or non-existent. I don't have a science and math background. I don't have an oil and gas or engineering background. And yet, I'm on our ESG committee for EQT. I actually wrote our ESG report. And, I'm a lawyer. I had to learn the difference between scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. I had to understand, what are vented emissions, what's the difference between these flared emissions. So if you take away nothing else from me from this call, I would really urge everybody, if your long-term desire is to go in-house, know that you have to be very amenable and flexible, and because suddenly you may become the ESG person at your company, and you may not have a background in it. But what we've noticed at EQT in particular is, although there's always been an interest in ESG issues, I think this is actually the case not just for oil and gas companies, but for all publicly traded companies. I think companies that aren't showing, one, both transparency, and two, how they're improving on their ESG metrics, are really putting themselves at risk in terms of being able to raise capital. Moody's, S&P, they've also come out with their own ESG frameworks, and it's going to be a factor into how they're ranking debt of publicly traded companies. Certainly, you've seen a lot of interest in it from the big institutional investors. I think most recently, BlackRock, Vanguard has come out and said it. So I think right now we're at the point in ESG where it's more about disclosure and transparency than it is about performance. At EQT, I think we like to think that we're a little bit ahead of the game, especially with coming out with the aggressive emissions reduction targets that we've come out with. But truth be told, I think we're still at a stage where companies are trying to determine what metrics should we even be disclosing. A lot of the issue right now is there's so many different disclosure metrics. I'm like I said, I'm a securities attorney. Every quarter we have to file a 10Q, or end of the year we file a 10K. I know what all the rules are. I go to Reg SK, and it tells you, if you want to read it, what all of the disclosures are for those reports. When it comes to ESG reporting, there's a lot of different disclosures out there, and they aren't always aligned, right? You have GRI, you have SASB, you have TCFD. In our industry, you have AXPC. And they're all disclosing similar metrics in a different way. In particular, GHG and methane intensity. People talk all the time, our intensity is X or Y, but there's different ways to calculate intensity. And I think that while it's great right now that more companies are, doing better at disclosing a lot of these metrics, I think from a consumer standpoint, as a consumer, you need to be very careful about making sure it's an apples to apples comparison among companies, just because there's no single disclosure framework that's saying, intensity is calculated like this, or, this is what is defined as flaring, right? So I think there's an opportunity right now for some companies to get cute and maybe pad their metrics a little bit. Given that our ESG report was written by myself, who's an attorney, I tried to be mindful of that. And I think we actually probably over disclose. You'll see there's a lot of footnotes in our emissions that say exactly how we're disclosing things. And I think that's actually the point we need to get to, not just in our industry, but for all publicly traded companies. And I think the SEC is actually trying to get to that too, where you have a standard framework for how a metric is defined. And if you're outside of that, then you're disclosing, how you're adjusting it. The same as you would do with a non-GAAP number in financial statements, right? If you're not using GAAP, then you're disclosing, how you're adjusting it, or how it's not non-GAAP. And I think that's ultimately what we need to get to, so that we have an apples to apples comparison on these ESG metrics, because otherwise it's just a lot of noise, right?
Thank you, Patrick. And I see that ESG issues are keeping you up at night as well. But you said something you gave really good advice to this audience about being adaptable. And I think that's just not being in-house. I think you have to be adaptable if you want to be an energy lawyer, period. Because even in the non-traditional space, there are so many nuances and niche practices that you can carve out for yourself in the energy space. So being adaptable, and coachable are traits that you really have to have if you want to be an energy lawyer. Before I move on to the next question, Son, did you want to add anything to Patrick's? What's keeping him up at night? Clearly, more than me.
Yeah, I'm a little fortunate in that I am because I support trading and supply and not traditional oil and gas. You know, my group is not the ones digging the holes into the ground, and so our issues around ESG are sort of not as direct as Patrick's are in terms of the concerns I may have, right? So Shell has its own net zero goals. I think it's 2050 for Shell. But we also have included sort of net zero with respect to our customers as well. We want to help our customers get to their net zero goals by providing them with, you know, clean energy and power. And that's where sort of the knockdown effects of ESG come to my group, right? So now, because I support power mostly and natural gas, we are getting busier and busier and busier as we go along, because as Shell makes this pivot towards more clean energy sources, we're looking at solar, we're looking at wind power, and a lot more deals involving those types of power sources, as well as power sources that provide us and our customers with renewable energy credits, right, to help them meet their net zero goals. So I think those are the effects that I'm feeling more in terms of getting busier with the types of contracts we get into. I'm sorry, the volume of contracts, but also the type of contracts. Now we're going to different types of transactions, different kinds of deals that we want to get into. And that's the challenging part. And that's the part that kind of keeps me awake at night. And sometimes when a deal comes on to my desk, and I look at it, I will admittedly sometimes look at this deal and have no idea as to how we're going to paper something like this, and not understand sort of the project that's actually supplying us with the power or gas. And I think if you're going to get into this business, you have to be okay sometimes with looking at something and saying to yourself, I need to find out how to do this. And then you go use your resources and you do some research into it. You talk to your regulatory compliance folks. Maybe they have some expertise. Because the problem with, you know, the U.S. especially is that you have 50 states and they all have the different regulations sometimes with respect to some of these deals. And you can't possibly understand all of that. Well, maybe some people in the call can, I can't. And so you have to find the experts who have knowledge in those areas, talk to them, and then get to a point where, you know, you think you can put together the deal competently, obviously. But that's sort of what keeps me up at night is traders are a very creative group of people for the most part, and they will find ways to make money based on the natural gas or power products that you're currently trading in ways that you probably would never have come up with. And some of them are extremely good at their jobs in terms of this creativity, and it's a challenge to really kind of keep up with them and find a way for them to do the deal without, as Patrick said, breaking any laws or regulations. And it's fun in a way, and it's exciting in a way, but it can also be sometimes very scary in a way. And sometimes you do sit there and second guess and third guess yourself in terms of how we're going to do these kind of deals. But it is a challenge, and if you're up for it, it's a great way to you know, build your skill set and build that kind of practice, because you can take those kind of skills, as you said, Shanisha, and kind of apply them to different areas and then move to different areas of your practice within either your own company or a different company. So
great. And you said something, you were very transparent. And I think that we all face this, getting something on your desk and you're like, what in the world is this? And sure. It's exciting on one hand because you're like, okay, at the end of the day, I'm figuring out this very complex issue, or I'm helping, sure. You know, but at the other side, it's like, whoa, this is very complicated and I don't know where to begin. So that's another angle and a very transparent point of sometimes you just, you know, have to realize that you don't know it, but right. you have the resources to figure it out and the skill set to figure it out.
Right, and that goes back to Patrick's point earlier about being more of sometimes a project manager, because sometimes these deals come across your desk and they are half-baked deals. They really haven't thought everything through, and I think part of your job as a good lawyer is to really ask the questions that need to be asked. And And you get two results there. One result is the deal is terrible and they shouldn't be doing it. And they start to realize that as well. The second result is you clarify the terms of the deal so that it does make more sense and so that you can paper it properly for the company. So either way, I think you're going to be benefiting yourself.
Great. So our next question, William, what led you to the road less traveled? And did it take some type of grit or courage? And do you think you'll stay within your area?
So if we're going to call, so I do bankruptcy law, which it's a little bit of the road less traveled. It's a small kind of group of people who ends up doing this. I'll say I grew up in Houston in the late 90s, kind of when I was kind of coming of age. And that was, I don't know if any of y'all remember a company called Enron. So Enron filed for bankruptcy in 2001, and it was just the biggest scandal in the whole world. And the Wall Street Journal published some long articles, which became a book called Smartest Guys in the Room. And then so this kind of being around, being young and going, what's bankruptcy, right? And so you read about it and you read about the process. And then I graduated from college as a finance major in 2009. I don't know if you guys remember what 2009 was like, but it was not great for finance majors. And so I was supposed to go work at a bank. The bank hired everybody. And so you start reading about all this stuff about Lehman Brothers and bankruptcy and all that kind of stuff. And I randomly had two kind of mentors in my life, my best friend's uncle and a good friend of mine, father, who just happened to be in the bankruptcy space. You learn about it that way. You read about it that way. I went to law school, never intended to be a bankruptcy lawyer. And just as way leads on to way, that's how, it's my first job was in bankruptcy. And, 8-9 years later, I'm still doing it. I will say, it's funny. If you talk to bankruptcy lawyers, generally, nobody sets out with the idea of becoming a bankruptcy lawyer. It's always some random path. If you're a litigation associate, you get staffed on some bankruptcy litigation. You're a corporate guy who got roped into doing a purchase and sale agreement, whatever the case may be. It's like I joke with people that we're an island of misfit toys. But there's a certain sensibility and I guess flexibility that we all have kind of in common. I guess you said, would it take grit or courage? I would say no. I wouldn't use either of those words to describe myself or my path. My grandmother, when I was a kid, she told me, I guess I was in high school at that point, she told me she didn't know where I was going, but she knew I was making great time. And so that's kind of how my law practice has gone, and it goes back to what they were saying as well about being flexible, is that we all have these grand plans and designs when we take the LSAT, and we're going to be, international law lawyers arguing at the Hague to release, misfortunate people in some other, country, right? And then, yeah, and then we all get, we get a B in torts or whatever the case may be, whatever the punch in the mouth that you get is, right, in law school, when you go, well, maybe I'm not going to be the next Paul Clement or whatever it is that you aspire to be. And then opportunities present themselves. And it really is, if I can give law school students any advice, or some associates any advice, is that don't be beholden to whatever you think that your plan or course of action is. That's not to say to throw everything out the window at the first sign of trouble or hard work or whatever it is. But lots of times, you think you're going to do something and then you find something else, you go, I never even thought about this. And I absolutely love this. And it's a perfect fit for the way that I think, the way that I work and all that kind of stuff. And so you really have to be flexible in that regard. And for me, that ended up with me doing bankruptcy work, and I never would have in a million years picked it. And perhaps if I had more grit or courage, I might be the next Paul Clement, but I don't. And so I'm just a bankruptcy lawyer who does a lot of oil and gas work. Oh, and will I stay in it? Yes, because I think it's the greatest job and most fun job you can have practicing law, but I am admittedly biased.
Great. Sona Patrick, anything to add with our third discussion question about what led you to the road less traveled? Did it take any grit or courage, and will you stay?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could inspire all these students who are watching this right now and say, hey, I had this great plan to become a senior counsel at Shell, but I had no plan coming out of law school except to try to get a job. I think that's everybody's plan. Shanisha, from your resume, it sounds you had way more of a plan than I did, or either William did either. So congratulations on that.
I didn't though, and it's
Oh.
kind of like the same that you all said. Is you have one plan and
Yeah.
it kind of went out the door.
Yeah, no. To William's point, at this point in my career, I was supposed to be helping immigrants in my hometown with their legal issues, but that never really kind of turned out for me. I think just like his experience, I just kind of took opportunities as they came along. I worked for a technology company startup for a little bit. They went bankrupt after 2 years. I took a job at a big law firm doing securities when I first got out of school, and then I took a job at a firm doing general transactional work for a while, and then just happened to stumble across this opening at an energy company in Canada, where I'm actually where I grew up, and that's where my energy practice started. So was there a unique skill set or I'm sorry, was there a road less traveled? I don't know. I don't know if Shell has hundreds of energy attorneys, so I don't think it's any road less traveled by anybody. It's just the road I traveled. Any grit or courage? And I can't say there was any grit or courage besides getting bills paid. I mean, I'm motivated a lot by fear more than sort of ambition at this point in my life. It's sort of, I've got a mortgage to pay. I've got college to pay for my kids. I've got things that I want to do in life. So grit or courage, I mean, if courage is the pressing on in the face of fear, yeah, I've got lots of courage, I suppose, in that sense. And I don't want this to be discouraging anybody who's listening to this thing. I mean, you've got the ability to sort of really take charge of your own life if that's really what you want to do. I mean, I've got friends who all they want to do is become a partner in a large law firm, and they are partners in large law firms right now. And, kudos to them. I just took a different path, I guess, and then sort of took opportunities that came along. And one of the great things about Shell is that we do have offices across the world, and Shell likes to have their attorneys go and do expat work in different countries for a few years. That's part of what attracted me to Shell in the first place. So I'd like to do that. In my career, though, I have had a chance to travel, right? So William actually worked for Lehman Brothers in New York right before they went under, actually. So I had a chance to travel to New York and work in New York as an attorney. I worked in California as an attorney, where I got my bar in California. I worked as an attorney in Canada, where I grew up, and now down in Houston. So I've loved the ability to take new opportunities and travel and work in different companies. And in terms of Shell, will I stay? I think I will. There's no guarantees in life, but I am on the sort of downside of my career at this point. Not downside meaning it's going to be terrible, but in terms of I'm not this up and coming young lawyer anymore. I've been around for a long time. I'm in a senior position in the company. There's a bit of leeway for me to sort of, keep going upwards in my career trajectory, but that's also not my plan, if I'm being honest, right? I'm not one of those folks who, when you ask them, like, do you want to work till you're 75 because you love it so much? That's not me. I work, I enjoy my work. I enjoy my colleagues. I enjoy the challenges, but I do have an earlier retirement plan than I think some of my colleagues may have, because I want to be able to take the nest egg or whatever that I built up by working in this profession. And it is a lucrative profession for us. That's not, let's be truthful about that. We do make a decent living doing what we do, but I want to take some of that and actually be able to enjoy that while I'm still relatively young. And so, my wife and I have plans for our retirement and for the money that we put aside for that. And that plan is earlier than perhaps other people's plans. So that's where I'm going to go with my career and over the next however long it takes me. But, I don't want to be working until however long and then retire, and then the next year something bad happens to me. I haven't had a chance to enjoy my retirement. So I want to take whatever youth I have left in me and actually enjoy some of that. So.
And thank you for those very honest responses. Patrick, do you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would just echo what both William and Sun said. I think it's really great, both with your career and then in life in general. I think you got to have a plan, but when the opportunity presents itself, you can't be so afraid of taking a risk that you let a good opportunity go. Because I think the older you get, the more you realize that really good opportunities only present themselves every so often. And if you don't capitalize on them, then they may not come back around. And, for me in particular, I'll preface this by saying, I can't think of a better place to start your career as a lawyer than a big firm. That's what I did. So maybe I'm biased, but truth be told, you're going to get better experience at a big firm than realistically anywhere else that I could think of. You're going to get to see a lot of different things. You're going to get to work with a lot of different people, a lot of different personalities. You're going to learn what works for you and what doesn't. And you're going to really get to cut your teeth. With that said, long term, I don't think big firms are the best route for all people. It certainly wasn't the right route for me. How I got to EQT was, like I said, I had no background in oil and gas. They were my only oil and gas client. I just had my first son, and I kind of looked around. I was on the partner track, and I looked around at all of the junior partners, and it just wasn't something that was really appealing to me. Like, I was working really hard, long hours, and it wasn't like, okay, once I get the partner, I can pull it back. They were working just as much as I was, and it just wasn't really something I wanted. So, I think you really have to, for your own mental health and for your own career development in our profession, I think you have to do a lot of honest self-assessment with yourself and not get caught up in the echo chamber, because frankly, you go right from law school, which is an echo chamber. Everybody's telling you, you got to go to the big firm in New York because that's what you do if you're any good or you have any value. And then a lot of people do that, and then they stay there, and it's like, well, now I got to make partner. Once you make partner, then it's like, well, then I got to make equity partner. It's a never ending thing, and you're always trying to get that brass ring. And I think it's you really have to be cautious and honest with yourself to constantly be saying, what do I have to do to get to my goals? But also, are these goals still even something I want to continue to pursue? Who I am 5 years ago isn't who I am today. And so my goals may need to be adjusted accordingly because of that.
Yes. Wow. Such good advice. And I think our panelists are being a bit bashful. It takes a lot of grit and courage to be in this profession, to be a lawyer, especially practicing in the energy space. You have to exercise your courage and grit, I think, every day. But maybe that's just me. But Patrick really highlighted something that's also very important, is self-assessment and what your core values are. And I just kept smiling while LT was talking about partnership track, and I'm just going to keep smiling and move on to the next question. So what are some of your transferable skills that you've gained in your respective disciplines? And Sun, you touched on this briefly, and you have a lot of experience with negotiating and drafting contracts. Describe how that skill set has helped you with different types of contracts or different types of business units within your organization. And then we'll go to Patrick and William to just give one or two transferable skills that you've gained and how that could apply in different areas.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of just practicing law, I mean, people make fun of that term, but I think it's a good term because the more you do something, the better you're going to get at it. So as you see more and more contracts and the similar terms in contracts and issues that come up in contracts, that builds a real good base of experience for you to draw upon when you're doing other types of agreements. So you're going to have a lot of those experiences that you're going to find help you as you transfer to different jobs or deal with different types of contracts. That's something you can only gain through years of practice. So, the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. So, but in terms of the intangible transferable skills, coming out of school, I didn't have a lot of experience dealing with commercial people and our business folks. And as you deal with them more often, you become better at talking to people, asking the right questions, driving the project or agreement towards conclusion. and being better able to steer the commercial folks in the right direction, I think, by asking the questions that they haven't asked themselves because of the experience you've had in other projects and agreements. So I think those really are the skills that I've gained in working as an attorney, being able to look at things critically. And while you're in law school right now, you're not necessarily being trained in the law. I mean, you are learning the actual law itself, but I think you're being trained to look at things as a lawyer. And that's where your skills are really going to benefit the company or firm that you're going to eventually be working at.
Thanks, son. William?
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Well, first off, to touch on something you just said a second ago, I don't know that we're being bashful, but I do think that anybody who tells you that becoming competent in the legal profession in any of the areas, whether it's energy law or any other area of law, that tells you that it's going to be easy or that it's not going to be an enormous amount of work to just get past the initial I don't know anything scale is either some superhuman robot or they're lying to you. And so it is not to sugarcoat it, but like to get good at something, it takes a lot of work. And sometimes that work is difficult and sometimes it sucks. But like, that's just like full caveat. Like I think all three of us would tell you that that's how you get to, I'm not saying you get good at something, I'm just saying like baseline competence is a really hard thing to get to in the area of law. So kind of ties into this transferable skill idea is that law school, someone's talking about, it teaches you kind of how to think. And I'd say that being a practicing bankruptcy lawyer kind of takes that and puts it on steroids because every case is different. So to paraphrase, Tolstoy, like, every dysfunctional company is dysfunctional its own way. And so they all have different problems. They all have different industries, even within the oil and gas industry. One case may be upstream, one may be downstream. The issue may be breaches of fiduciary duty. It may be, malfeasance by the private equity backed, sponsor, right? So everything's different. And so it's just, you learn to learn really fast. And you learn to process things and to find the important aspects of it and to succinctly condense it down to what matters. And so, bankruptcy lawyers are generalists. Like, I'm not Son and Patrick could run circles around me in their areas of law, but we, bankruptcy lawyers, you get this kind of general perspective of everything. So it's an inch deep, mile wide type of a practice area. And so, I would argue that, selfishly and completely biased way that I think bankruptcy law practice, prepares you the best to be a general practicing lawyer. Is that you get to see everything, you take depositions, you get to do, contested evidentiary hearings, you get to do sales and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's just it's a great training ground for people who candidly are a little bit, ADD and like to bounce from thing to thing and learn new things all the time.
Perfect. Patrick?
Yeah, so I think there's this interesting dichotomy when you get out of law school, you go into, let's say you go into work at a law firm, and, I think most people are coming out of school, and especially if you go to a big firm, you probably did pretty well in school, and, you did well in school. Maybe you were on law review, you were just the big bad 3L on campus, and you think something, at least something, and maybe some of you think a lot, and then you get into a firm and you very quickly learn like almost nothing, because like it's weird in that the practice of law differs very, very much from like the learning of law. So you go from thinking a lot to realizing nothing, and then you're in that kind of environment for a long time. And then if you're like me, then you switch over to private practice, and going into private practice, you're like, well, maybe I didn't know as much as I did. I don't really know that much. And it's weird because in private practice, the people you're working with, in a law firm, you're one of several hundred maybe attorneys. Then you go into private practice, and especially, even at EQT, we have a legal department of 15 people. So there's only 15 attorneys at our whole company. So everybody who's not an attorney seems to think that you know at least something about everything. So you go from thinking you know a lot to people telling you know nothing, to thinking you know nothing to people telling you you should know a little bit about everything. So I think coming into these different environments just with the right mindset, and the other panelists have kind of touched on this, coming into a firm, you really need to, check your ego at the door and come in and just realize, listen, I'm low man on the totem pole. I'm here to learn how to practice. I'm here to learn, frankly, social skills, how to interact with people that maybe I don't like to work with. And then if you do transition to working at a company, it is another transition where, you have to have confidence, because even if you don't know necessarily how to do something, you're probably smart enough that you can figure out how to do it. Right. And if you're, going to constantly be saying, well, I don't know how to do this, so I can't take it on, or, that's not what I do. It kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier about, just being adaptable. If you're in-house, you're really going to be looked upon in a very unique way by your business counterparts, and they're going to be relying on you. So you need to have confidence that, despite what firms tell you, you do know something about something, and if not, you can figure it out. So that's kind of my advice in that regard.
Thank you, Patrick. And our last question, we're running a little bit short on time. We want to leave some time for a few questions from the students. So yes or no, and I'm pretty sure we'll get all yeses. And you can briefly say why. The best careers fit your lifestyle, your passions, and your aspirations. Would you recommend your current role to your law school student son?
No. And not for the reason that you're not for the reason that you may think. It's not because it's not a good job. It's not because I don't enjoy my job, but I think your law school self is 25, 26 years old at the most, right? Around there. It's been a long time for me. As Patrick was saying, you're not the same person when you're at 25 as you're at my age at 50 now. So, this is not the perhaps the job for a 25-year-old person, 26-year-old person. It's a good job for a 50-year-old person. So if you're 25, 26, I would say, as I talked about before, take the opportunities that interest you, take the opportunities that make you happy, right? You have a long career ahead of you to settle into something that's going to, pay the bills and set you up for retirement, all that kind of stuff. Things that I'm looking at now that you're not looking at 25. When I was 25, 26, I took all those opportunities. I moved to California, moved to New York, moved to different places to take on different interesting opportunities that, were to me going to make me more happy than anything else. And that's the biggest advice I could probably give myself in law school, is to do things that will be interesting to you and that you think will make you happy at the end of the day. It's a lot of time for you to become old and bitter and beaten down by life. At 25, 26, be happy. Find things that are going to make you happy, that you're going to do. If you really want to chase the dollars and chase the prestige and chase all that kind of stuff, and that is your goal, and that at 25, go for that as well, right? But if you don't really know what it is you want to do, take opportunities that you think are interesting and might make you happy, and just try them. You have a lot of time to really settle into something. So that's what I would tell my current law school self.
Perfect. William?
Yeah, I'll answer the same way he did, but I'll say yes. But only in the sense that I'll change your question. I wouldn't recommend this job or this particular thing to law school me, but I would tell law school me to go down the same road that I went down. I don't know if I reran the simulation 10,000 times if I end up back at this particular spot in any of those iterations. But I would tell law school me to, there's a concept, yes and, right? Why present you say something? Don't say no, don't say but, go yes and. So whatever the good opportunity happens, say yes, I want to do that, and here's how I'm going to do it. So that's what I would tell law school me.
Patrick, yes or no? Would you recommend your current role to your law school student self?
Yeah, effectively, yeah. So I would answer it the same way, William. Not my exact role that I'm in now, but I mentioned it earlier. I really can't think of a better place to start your career than a firm. I do think big firms are the best in that regard, but realistically, any firm, in my opinion, is the best place to really get your start.
Perfect. Well, this has been wonderful. And William, Son, and Patrick, you gave such great advice to the students and me as well as an associate.